Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone Season 5, Episode 23. It's called Queen of the Nile. So spoilers for the episode, as always. If I sound a little annoyed at the start of this review, it's because this is the third time I've started it, and I've been interrupted multiple times. So now I'm just like, I really want to just have it done. Like I got interrupted, like just enough time into it that it wasn't quite enough to try and salvage. I just felt like I had to start again. So here we are, take 3. Let's get it done. This is about an actress who's apparently not aged in many years, and an investigator, or maybe a journalist is a better descriptor, who's there to interview her and notices that her portrait from like 1940 looks the same as she does now in 1965 or thereabouts. So a romance blossoms between them, and he investigates more and more of what she's saying. Like, oh, she says she was in this movie or this play, so he like fact checks some of these things and is surprised to learn that some of these things were happening in the 1920s and even further back even. So that's our two main characters. The third most prominent character is the old woman who lives with her, who initially is presented as her mother, which makes sense. But the big cliffhanger before the ad break is that she is actually her daughter, which I think is a good cliffhanger for the ad break. I often talk about on these reviews about having a good moment to go to the ads, like a moment that hooks you to make you want to come back afterwards. And I think this is a good one. It's not a surprising reveal, given that we're already teasing the idea that she's immortal or she's not aging. The reveal that the old woman's actually her daughter is not surprising, I think, if you're thinking about it at all. But it's still a really good moment to go to the ads on, because for the character who hears it, for the journalist, who at this point has just been kind of amazed that she looks so good and so young for her age, this is the big moment for him where he's like, wait a minute, that's like science fiction. Like, this is not just she looks good for her age anymore. This is absolutely absurd levels. And that inspires him to keep investigating in the second half of the episode, even while he's dating her, and discovers that some of the theaters she said she performed in had been demolished in the 1920s and things like that. So he keeps poking the bear, even though the mother/daughter character keeps telling him to go away and they shouldn't get involved, which is probably leads to the biggest complaint I'd have with the episode. And it's not even really the episode's fault. It's more just that I think we've all seen various interpretations of this kind of story. That being that this is a person who is stealing life from others to stay young, right? That's what the story is. Ultimately, she is going to steal this guy's life force or energy to keep her at the same age. I think normally this would be like a witch who does this. I think the most traditional version of the story would be that. Whereas here, the title of this episode, Queen of the Nile, refers to the fact that she was in a movie called Queen of the Nile when she was quite young, and that's one of the things that he's surprised by, is that she must have been like 15 when she was in that. But then it turns out when he goes digging in the second half of the episode that she was also in a silent version of that movie looking the same age from 1920 something, which it did get me thinking that this is obviously in a time period where you can't just go and get the movie and watch it at home. Like VHS isn't a thing yet, at least not widely in the 60s. So while today we're used to being able to just go back and watch a movie from the 30s or 40s and check the footage for ourselves, he can't just do that in this episode. And I thought that was interesting as a sort of time capsule element of the story. No, it turns out that the title of the episode is actually a lot more literal. She is actually, or at least it's heavily implied, that she is a real queen from the Nile, and that she uses this like scarab beetle thing that sucks his life out, and which is an interesting effect actually when we see it. Like he kind of like becomes a skeleton, and then the skull actually cracks open, and the next time we look down at him, he's just like dust. There's like clothes just lying on the floor, but there's like powder where the skull and like the hands were. It's fun. It's actually about as probably dark as they could get away with in 1965 on regular TV. So I appreciated the visual quality to the well, the murder effectively. Yeah, I think, like I was saying though, the big thing that maybe goes against it is that we've seen stories like this, I think, growing up, and this wouldn't have been a problem when it first aired, But for me, as soon as this guy walked in and I'd heard Rod say, "Oh, this woman appears to be eternally beautiful," and the mother, who later turns out to be the daughter, says to him, "Hey, don't get involved, just leave and never come back," like she's warning him about something, I was like, "Oh, I know where this is going." And nothing ever changed, nothing ever like pivoted or added an extra layer. And it's almost unfortunate in a weird way, because I think I'm being unfair in a way, because I don't think it needs an extra twist or an extra layer on its own terms. I think when this aired in 1965, it probably wasn't that predictable to the audience. I mean, maybe some people, I mean, I'm sure there were stories written with this kind of plot and stuff, but as soon as it became clear that that's what she was doing, as soon as it popped into my head, oh, she's probably just stealing life force from young men and keeps on living young that way. As soon as that became clear, it almost felt like the episode was just kind of winding down to an inevitable conclusion, which is a shame, because I do think the performances from all three lead characters are solid enough. I do think the investigation elements of him asking about these previous movies that she was in, or these plays she was in, these locations that don't exist anymore, and this guy in an old records room being like, "Oh yeah, that place was demolished in the 20s." I thought those like breadcrumbs that he was following were quite interesting. It's just that everything he's investigating, I already feel like I knew the answer to, and I never really got like an extra element that kind of surprised me. I suppose the bigger surprise could have been that, oh no, she literally dates back to ancient Egypt, and she's using something from back then, from those times, that she's been continuously using since. And that's why she took these roles in movies, playing this type of character, because she's literally just being what she was thousands of years ago. And maybe that's why she was good at it. Although there's probably a joke there, though, that a modern audience, and when I say modern, I mean, you know, in the time these movies were made, even in 1940, as it's told to us, that a modern like director or producer would not like get the authenticity, and instead we go, no, we don't want that, we want it to be sexy, we don't care if it matches what people were actually like. Not that they would know, because no one was around in that time period, except of course our main character here, except this actress. So, you know, we've seen Twilight Zone tackle this type of subject before. This is almost like an inverse. I brought this up when we heard what this one was going to be at the end of last episode, but this is almost an inverse of that story from season 1 about the actress who was obsessed with her movies now that she's old, and she ends up getting into the film at the end to like sort of try and like regain her youth. This is a character who has been continuously keeping her youth at the cost of others, and is, you know, never going to give it up. The performance is a little interesting, because it does seem like she maybe does like him. You could almost argue that it's only because he's starting to put things together and he's starting to ask questions she doesn't want to answer, because she kind of dances around the questions in a flirtatious way in the first half of the episode, but then she starts to get a little bit more agitated that he keeps asking questions about her past, about dates, about years, about timelines, and she basically just roofies his drink and then gives him this beetle thing, which is where we get our big scene towards the end. And I think that maybe suggests to me that she at the very least did this earlier than she anticipated, because she is like, okay, he's asking too many questions, I've got to do this now. But at the same time, like, she probably does want to just keep being young. And the end of the episode's this other young man coming in for some kind of appointment that clearly she's going to now suck his life away. So, you know, I think it's a classic kind of horror trope, this horror concept of the immortal person who is sucking the life out of others to stay young. I think the episode is fairly well put together. I don't think, like, you know, all the scenes are on their own are pretty good. All the performances are pretty good. It just maybe suffers from predictability, I guess, where you just kind of know exactly where it's going from really early on, and it never really does anything to change where that is. You know, part of me was hoping that when he was investigating the back half of the episode, that maybe he would find something that does kind of shake it up a little bit, and there's a bit more to it than that. There was a line when he's talking to the guy on the phone who's like, you know, this Hollywood records keeper dude, or whoever it is, and he's talking about this earlier version of the Queen of the Nile movie that this actress was in. he says, oh yeah, there was a silent version in the 1920s, and yeah, the photographs of the actresses look very similar. But he kind of waves that away. He says, yeah, but they were cast for the same role. They're wearing similar makeup, similar costumes. They're kind of made to look similar, which is not a unreasonable sort of rationalization of seeing these somewhat identical photos from different decades. But he kind of like briefly mentions, oh, there was like a cave-in when they were filming in Egypt and like a tomb. And I thought that that was going to become more of a thing. Like that was going to be like, oh, that's when she kind of like came, like maybe there was a real actress who was just in the movie, and then this like ancient woman who'd been asleep in a tomb woke up and took her life, and she's only been kind of active in that sense since then. But I don't know if there were anything else in the rest of the episode ever really gave me that kind of clue that there was a real person that she took over from when she woke up. But I thought it was maybe setting something like that up, and it never quite did. I mean, you could maybe still read it that way if you want to, I guess. I don't think they ever show you any proof that she was around active in some way before that time. I guess thematically, one of the things that I do kind of like about it in a weird way is this idea that film and like making movies is a way to sort of preserve people in a certain time and place, right? So this idea that the idea of making this character an actor and that she's in movies, it sort of ties into this idea that, yeah, like we are always going to have, young Harrison Ford being Indiana Jones or Han Solo, right? We're always going to be able to go back to that time and see what he was like. Not the real person, of course, but we're always going to have that time capsule to see how he moved, how he spoke, all that kind of thing. And I think there's this idea of capturing a moment in time that maybe film kind of does, that maybe adds to the themes of to having this character be tied to that kind of industry. She, in many ways, a movie star, as you think of them, not literally in real life, of course, they get older, they get, eventually they'll die, they move on. But when you think of an actor in their prime, or not even in their prime, but just like with the work that you associate them with, for me, when I think of, say, pick another one, Bruce Willis, I'm thinking of Die Hard. I'm thinking of Bruce Willis looking like he was in Die Hard. I don't think of bald Bruce Willis from 20, 30 years later. So, in a weird way, like, he's only really Bruce Willis to me if you actually get him in a very specific span of time. And I think it's interesting that this character perhaps has been kind of literally keeping herself in that span of time, that sort of prime age that she considers, and is refusing to get old. I don't know, like, maybe how intentional that is, or if I'm just maybe thinking about it a little bit too much, but it definitely adds a little extra layer to the episode for me, where it's intentionally a tie to the idea of filmmaking and movies. But that's me kind of like drawing a little bit more out of it to enjoy it a touch more than perhaps I actually did. Which is not to say, again, it's not a bad episode by any means. It's perfectly watchable. The performances are good. The scenes are fairly well directed. There's really nothing to complain about, just other than the fact that the romance itself and the story is not special. It feels by the numbers, but again, I'm not sure how much of that is just because, oh, I've seen various episodes of TV shows tackle this type of character before, so it just doesn't feel that special to me now. It might have been a bit more of an interesting concept at the time. Yeah, let me know what you think of Queen of the Nile in the comments. Of course, Rod did show up at the end to tease the next episode, as he always does. It's called What's in the Box, which is, it's hard not to think of Seven when you read the line What's in the Box anymore. But obviously, this predates that movie by a good 40 years. So, nothing to do with that. Here's a description on IMDb. Philanderer Joe Britt sees his indiscretions shown on his own TV after it was worked on by a unique repairman. Yeah, that's kind of what Rod was getting at, is that he would start seeing like visions in the TV or something like that. Very interesting. I always enjoy stories that kind of that deal with the idea of like mysterious like messages in the signal of like old analog broadcast TV and radio waves and things like that. I don't know if that's the sort of like tree it's barking up necessarily. It sounds like it may be more just supernatural, like, oh, after this guy works in the TV, all of a sudden it's showing him direct things. That sounds more like what it's doing. But I do like the concept, just based on what I've read there. So we'll see how that shapes up next time. But thank you very much for joining me. You can, of course, support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Help keep the lights on, help keep the content coming. You can also hit the like button on YouTube. Helps out a bunch if you do. More people will find us. So thank you very much for joining me once again. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.